Victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I am your host, Shamiza Ali, and it is a pleasure being here with you this evening. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, the Caribbean, and Guyana. Funding support is by well known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh.
Welcome to our viewers.
And our panelist tonight is Dr. Ganga Ramdas.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you.
Our guest tonight is no stranger to the Guyana Dialogue. He's Professor Muniram Budhu. Welcome, everyone.
Hello. Good to see you guys. Different seat today.
Definitely. Yeah. Dr. Tara, please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Welcome to our viewers. Before we start, we want to extend our deepest sympathy to the child who died at Tushin in West Coast. So we hope that there is peace has returned to that neighborhood. People are rightfully distressed about the death of this child. It can be anyone's child. So we should wait now on the outcome of the police investigation and to bring whoever is responsible into the swift justice. Today we are very happy also to have a person, as Shamisa just said, a frequent this program, Professor Muniram Budhu. He himself is a distinguished professional, a distinguished scholar. You know, he graduated from the University of West Indies with first-class honors in civil engineering. I believe he topped the graduation class in that year as well. Then he also occupied the chair, head of the Department of Engineering at the University of Guyana. And he also studied at the University of Cambridge, where he obtained his doctorate degree in civil engineering. He has traveled extensively throughout the world, Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, and he is fond of looking at the architecture, bridges, the physical as well as the social conditions under which people live. He has written numerous articles, textbooks, etc. He recently came back from a second visit to the Far East. He visited Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, South Korea, and I believe Thailand. So before we start, we'll ask him to give us a brief review about the physical structure of those countries, the infrastructure work there, what you observed, because you went there before, so you're in a position to explain the changes in that time period. So Professor Budhu, over to you.
Well, you know, places like Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam are recent, basically newcomers to development. In South Korea and Thailand, has been ongoing development for a lot of time. So I was there about 10 years ago. And if you look at these three countries, say Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, you see that development infrastructure, right, is massive. Right? All kinds of development is taking place. And the lives and the livelihoods of people have improved significantly. Right? I see similar changes being taking place in Guyana. And so I think there's a lot of competition worldwide. A lot of these countries are developing. But I think the last time I mentioned to you, one of the themes that although the lives of these people are improving, corruption seems to be at top of people's mind, right? These are a lot of allegations, for example, in Vietnam, which is a communist-run government. When I asked the guide, whether your livelihoods improve, he said, yes, tremendously. I said, what's what's the difficulties now? He says corruption. So I said, what corruption? He said, well, the minister lived in big houses. See, so there's a perception, right? And I said, well, did the government actually provide housing? He said, yes, right? So again, you have to be very careful. Corruption exists all over the place, and it's not restricted to any one given locality. So in summary, all these countries are making tremendous strides in developing in all areas, including manufacturing.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to Guyana now. You know, most of the infrastructure works is being done by the Ministry of Works. And in this year, 2025 budget, they were allocated $160.6 billion. For the past 4.5 years, they've completed 4,000 community roads, and they have built over 1,553 miles of roads. Either they built it and or rehabilitate them, 1,050 roads in the hinterland area. And also, as you know, they completed the Crane to the Sconard Highway, the Heroes Highway. They completed the Mandela Highway, and they completed the Sheriff Street. And through a contract with Indian contractors, it is expected that the Ogle to Eccles bypass road will be completed this year. They're working the Quarantine Highway right now, as well as on the link to East Bank. There are two stretches on the East Bank they're working on. So they're doing tremendous work down there. The bridges, you know, the Demar Harbor Bridge, there's about 260 million US. They're scheduled to be finished 31st of August, and the Wisma New Bridge for 35 million US. That is scheduled to finish sometime next year, early next year. So I want, if you can give us a general overview for us before we go into the challenges, your take on the scope of the physical infrastructure is distinct from the social infrastructure like housing, education, health, etc.
Well, Tara, before I answer your question, I want to make a disclaimer. I'm neither a spokesperson for the government of Guyana, nor am I a member of any of the political parties in Guyana. And my knowledge base with regards to answering questions on this program is based on interview, both live and backstage, with ministers of the government, and reading some of the newspapers in Guyana, and some articles I have written, and you and others have written in the newspapers, and from friends who have actually visited Guyana recently and had discussions with me. Most of them are actually engineers. So that's the knowledge base. I myself doesn't have direct knowledge on the development that is taking place there, beyond what I stated. Now, I want to tell you what infrastructure is, because I think that could be a misnomer here. I think a decade or so ago, when we talk about infrastructure, we simply mean roads and bridges, right, and the like, mean transportation related things. I think recently, in modern times, infrastructure covers a whole range of things and categories. We have the transportation infrastructure, we have housing infrastructure, education infrastructure, energy infrastructure. So what Guyana is embarking in is within this broad area of infrastructure. And so that I want to address that, because what you have just mentioned are roads and bridges. But I see that link that ties all of this is civil engineering, because in each of these activities, whether it's energy, whether it's education, building of houses, schools, or housing, or water, it's all involved civil engineering. So this broad area the government is embarking, right, is really has big context as far as civil engineering is concerned. So if you look at what the government has stated, and this is for the 2020 election, they stated very clearly what they're going to focus on, this infrastructure. They talk about transportation infrastructure. They talk about energy. They talk about education, information technology, and the communication technology infrastructure, right? So if you look at the transportation infrastructure, you mentioned some of the works they are doing now. The new Demerara Bridge, they're thinking about building a bridge across the Berbice River. There's the Quarantine Bridge being planned, right? Then there's the Linden Latem Road that is being made into all-weather road. That is going to link Guyana, French Guyana, and Suriname to Brazil, northern Brazil. That's fantastic linkages, right? And of course, the Quarantine Bridge will link Suriname and even French Guyana to Guyana. So you see that there is a lot of by the way, there's river transport, port, and harbor facilities. And I come later to the challenges and some of the weaknesses there. But then they have housing. They said initially that they gave up 50,000 house lots. When the minister came on there, they planned to deliver on that. But they went beyond that. They're actually developing housing, right? They regularized various lots and various other things they're doing in that area. Then the water. I think they have water all over the country now, including hinterland areas. The energy infrastructure, you have the gas-to-shore facilities, you have the Myla Forest. Both of these things I wrote about and I strongly support. In fact, the Myla Falls, I was surprised that was not built because Guyana has tremendous hydropower potential, and we need to exploit that resources very carefully and sustainable, and that can be done, right? For example, the Myla Falls, I think, is about 165 megawatt that it will generate. You know how much if you have a data center, you know how much one of these big data centers, they require over 100 megawatts. So to give you the scale, if you're looking at development into these areas, right, you need a lot of power generation for these types of things, right? Then you have education. There's a lot of schools being built, infrastructure there again, right, to give access. Then there is the hospitals and healthcare facilities, being built. So you look at this range of things that the government is doing, right, is what I would only describe as massive, especially when you compare this to, say, 5 years ago. In fact, since independence, what is taking place in Guyana we have never seen before, right? And I think it's compared very favorable to what is happening in the countries that I researched.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right. Thank you, Professor Budhu. We'll go into some of those things a little more. You mentioned about the housing scheme being created. Actually, they've created 86 new housing schemes during the last 4.5 years. And as of April the 5th of this year, created over 43,000 house lots, and they're on target to realize the 50,000. I recall at the election campaign, when the PP said that they will create 50,000 house lots and 50,000 jobs. Many people were skeptical and they doubted that, including the press. And now they have achieved both. Over 60,000 jobs are created and house lots, they reach a target. Plus, they never promised to build new houses, and over 2,000 houses were built. Another 1,500 are in process. Now I'll go over to Dr. Ganga. I think you want to focus a little more on the Ministry of Works side, the roads and bridges, because you have some experience in that.
Well,
because I think you're engaged in Wadi Road construction.
Well,
go ahead.
before we get down to the to the roads parts. I'm glad that Professor Budhu defined what he meant by infrastructure. Now, just to pave the way for our discussions, the infrastructure projects should be integrated with an overall plan so that we have some amount of consistency. And the way I look at it from the top is you have the broad aspects of the infrastructure plan, and then you have the sectoral ones, which Professor Budhu mentioned, power transport, which is both vehicles and types of roads and bridges. He mentioned also water and passing. He also touched on the social infrastructure, health, education, housing. So each sector has its own type of infrastructure. So whether it's an economic sector or a social sector, it would have its peculiar and special type of infrastructure. And that we must heed as we drill down to the project level. So, in terms of broad objectives that are coordinated with the nation's mission and vision for Guyana, we have our traditional sectors. For example, we were good at producing rice. We were good at producing sugar, and then rice and bauxite, and later on came gold and now oil. So we have to be mindful of the strategic objectives for our overall sectors. So we can look at market share, for example. We have some issues looming with regard to rice. Rice prices on the international market and so forth would affect how we deliver our productions in that sector. And of course, we have we continue to have our distinctive competence in rice because we have lots of land. Guyana is endowed with lots of land, and what seems to be the common factor cutting across all sectors is the desire and the how I should put that. It's an objective to achieve low cost production. So all the sectors would be aiming at the low cost strategy. Without low cost, we will become uncompetitive, and we can have to close down some of our activities in those sectors. So we have to be mindful of our strategic objectives, whether it's market share, whether it's diversification and product differentiation, or whether it's a low cost strategy. That we can't do two together. We need to focus on one at a time, and maybe individual sectors would lend itself to two strategies. So right now we have to look at power in terms of low cost. We need data for that. We can look at transport. So we are aiming at low cost as well, but we have to dissect our activities in terms of, let's say, big buses and mini buses and the types of roads they would be running on, and of course the traffic flows. So as we move from our broad objectives to our sectoral objectives, for each sector we would have a type of infrastructure for that. So the question I would pose to Professor is, have we got an integrated set of plans, or are we moving towards that?
Okay. Well, Professor Ramdas, that I have asked this question to many ministers on this show, and I can't get an answer. Right? I even write to them personally, and I've got no response. And for the benefit of the viewers, let me explain what we are talking about here. First of all, we're talking about a master plan. And what is a master plan? It's like a blueprint, right? Or a map, for example, like a Google map, in which you have all your infrastructure laid out in there. And let's take an example of this. And by the way, before I go further, I want to let you know that the sectors we've talked about cannot be treated individually. They're all linked together, right? So you can pull out each part later on, but in the global way of thinking, and to make it more effective and efficient, especially in terms of cost, right? You have to look at this master plan. So let's look at roads and bridges, right? So if you look at roads and bridges, you have to lay out on there all the roads you are building, right? And have already constructed. The ones that you're repairing, the new roads, how they are connected to each other, how they're connected to river transport, how they're connected to air transport. So you must have this connectivity laid out. On that plan also, we show zoning. These parts are here for industrial. These other parts here are for housing, recreation, and all of these have to come into this major plan. Then you can pull out from each of those the areas or the sectors that you want to look at. So you have this broad plan for the whole country. And then you might have regional plans, and then you have individual sectors that you can pull out from, right? Now, none of that I know exists, right? If it exists, it's not made public. But such a plan has to be made public, because then that's the only way you're going to reach your goal in a very sustainable and cost-effective manner, right? Now, but we have to face reality, right? Because all these plans require short and long-term planning. What do I mean by short-term? At least 5 years, right? Because that's the time it takes even to start getting a road start constructed, right? So you have 5 years and then you have 10 years. So can we really do that in the context of Guyana? Right, so we have to be very careful how we try to address this, because in Guyana, we have a political divide, which is based on other things, but race is the key. So, and no single party really has an overwhelming majority. You can have a few disgruntled people, a few thousand, and then the election can be swing one way or another. So a government going into power, right, cannot really plan long term, right, unless all the parties in Guyana agree to do this for the benefit of the country, not to benefit only the local party. Now, I'll give you an example. The airport, right, which you probably know more than me, was a debacle, right? There was original design, then it was scaled down, and then this government tried to rectify it. The Muniram bridge was a problem that started, and then that was killed. And then there's all kinds of allegations made about the design and all kinds of other things. So you can't have that if you're going to develop a country, right? You have to have proper planning, right? And this is very difficult within the political climate of Guyana. So what you see government doing, like this, the PPC government, they have their manifesto, and they lay out what they're going to do. But they don't have this in this general framework. In fact, they could put this in a master plan for what they're going to do, but they haven't done this. And I think this is raising a lot of problems, because people cannot see the big picture, where they're going with all of these things. You see, what are they achieving? What do they want to achieve with all this, right? And all you get is sound bites, right? But they're doing a hell of a lot of good things, right? But the messaging is not getting through, because the people can't see the big picture. They see bits and pieces of what they are doing.
And Dr. Ganga, follow up.
Yes, so I'm glad Professor Budhu mentioned costs. Cost is the integration factor. You have to heed costs across all projects, And also, you have to be mindful of the physical resource cost and the human resource development cost, because without people, the projects would not take off. So we have to look at both aspects there. And as, as we move down from the national level or the broad level to the sectoral or regional levels, um, we need to factor in human costs. And I would like Professor Budhu to address that. How is it done? Because I've known some contractors. They bought lots of vehicles, but they have some challenges in terms of finding truck drivers and porters and maintenance people and so forth. So the human resource management part is very essential to make the project successful. So would you address that in terms of your thinking and what you have observed on the ground?
Well, let me first of all address something that you mentioned. You talk about cost here. I have written about this, that when we talk about cost, especially for what Guyana is now doing, we have to talk about life cycle cost, not simply cost to develop a road. You have to look for the life cycle cost, similar for the gas to show facilities, right? And you have to, again, that's look at this thing in a broad picture to see what's the value it's given for the expenditure that the government is making. Now, if you look at what the government is doing, as I said, I use the word massive infrastructure comparatively to what this country has ever seen before. They are doing this without having the required technical personnel with the qualification and experience required to do this job. But because they are laser focused on delivering on their promise, they have to take certain risks. So, for example, I heard ministers saying that we have to give contractor a chance. These are people without experience, never built anything, right? So if you do that, then I don't have to describe what you could get, right? You're making a big risk here, right? Because that person have their experience, but you give that. And then what happens when this contractor get a job? Rather than taking that opportunities to build up their expertise and experience, right? They default right away because of greed. Because contracting is an area where there's a lot of greed, you see. And what is lacking also in all these things, I've written a lot about this, is project management. That is very, very, is actually absent in some cases, and other cases very weak, right? So you're going to have all these massive infrastructure work built, and there's a question of quality. Right? So again, you have to have the personnel to do this. But again, we have to look in the context. The government wants to make it, as they use the word transformation. I don't like that word, but I'm not going. It's not. I don't want to describe or define why I don't like that word. What they're doing is trying to improve the lives of Guyanese, right? And they want to do it by taking the oil money, divert and create non-oil sectors, which I think is extremely positive.
Okay, I think, okay, thank you, Dr. Budhu. I think now we'll take a break for special message, and then we'll come back. Technician Asif, can you please introduce a special message now? Thank you. Like he's not around. Okay. Okay, I guess we are back. Now you speak about some contractors might not be necessarily qualified to do a particular job, and may be the case, but the difficulty is that on the one hand, the government is pressured to get a lot of people employed, and there's allegations of discrimination. The big contractors who have all the resources, manpower, etc., they will gobble up all the contracts, and the smaller ones with less experience will be outside. So they have the difficult task of, you know, it is really a ticklish situation for them. On the one hand, they got to demonstrate that they are fair in the awards of contract. On the other hand, they got to ensure there is quality. But there will be some kind of there's always a conflict between these two, and but I think that eventually what the government will realize, they will give the less technical type of contracts to the less qualified people, and like this Cunard to Crane Road, they had a big contract, but they split it up among 5 contractors, so each one of them can benefit from that. You see, it's not only a question of having the skills. They want to share out this in an equitable way to various contracting groups, and to give them a chance. And they got to deal with people who are not fully qualified in that area, and people who got an abundance of resources, etc. So they got to reconcile. Development is about the technical thing, is also about satisfying human needs, and etc. So it's difficult. Anyhow, Dr. Ganga, you
Yeah, yeah.
can you comment a bit?
Well, let me just take a piggyback on what Dr. Muniram Budhu did. This is very important because we're looking at a low cost strategy as an objective, but he mentioned a different view of cost, a life cycle approach to cost. This is very, very important because included in the life cycle would be maintenance costs. And you have seen some pictures of some roads that requires fast maintenance. As soon as it's built, something happens, and you see the big patchworks there, and we have to go back and overhaul that kind of a work. So the life cycle approach should be embedded in our plans. I strongly recommend that because at the end of it, you have to maintain the roads and the infrastructure. That should be part of the inner plans of the project management. Now, subcontracting is okay, but that too should be part of project management in terms of monitoring and controlling. And of course, Professor Budhu would talk more about the standards. So
All right.
go ahead.
Let me just read this comment by one apparent contractor. There's a comment. I agree that I need to have skilled people to do the job. However, giving people the opportunity to work on those projects need to have proper training. Is there any institution that offer this training required? There's a question. Then the other comment from Rajendra Singh. Awarding contracts to inexperienced contractors might be a risk on the technical side. However, those types of contracts are low, and such a small contracts are low, and such a small small roads and drains. So small roads and drains. Every project have engineers who are supposed to oversee each job to make sure the required standards are met. When there is a technical risk, the political calculation must be taken into consideration. Okay, Dr. Budhu, over to you.
Well, first of all, let me address the issue about, you said Wonder Roads, they've split that up with 5 contractors. There's an alternative way of doing this with inexperienced contractors, or who we want to give some opportunities to, is to mandate that the contractor with the experience, the major contractor, subcontract a certain percentage of the work to these contractors, so they could build up the experience individually. This is common, and this has been doing in the United States, Canada, and other places, so they can build up their reputation of doing good work, right? And this is the opportunity they have to get the experience and try and get the entrepreneurial experience to run a business. So that's an alternative that I think the government should consider, because there's high risk. I don't care whether it's a small road or a drain, it has to be done properly, right? And if you look, in fact, some of the engineers that came back from Guyana and reported to me, they said that there are some contractors on road that can't read a drawing, right? Or there is no drawing, engineering drawing, right? These are no for any kinds of development, right? Whether it's true, I don't know, but I still want to know why they would lie. So there's a lot of risk the government is taking to satisfy their manifesto, right? And I presume they're willing to take that risk. But then the question is, what is the value you're getting for the expenditure? I, for example, heard, and I don't know if you can confirm this, Tara or Dr. Ramdas, or the viewers, that the Heroes Highway, there's a lot of complaint about that highway, which was only finished about 1 or 2 years ago. So again, a concrete highway 1 or 2 years ago, and there's major complaints. Where's the value?
Okay, Dr. Ganga, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to address the training. I participated in the Mahika-Maikoni Road building projects there. We supplied from Susdijk sand and loam to the Mahika-Maikoni roadways. And what, in terms of project management and training, the laborers on the truck, we bore those costs. As owners, we would take anyone and show them how to operate with a spade and so forth. But when it comes to licensing, like say truck drivers, that's a higher level, and that we would make sure that the drivers are licensed drivers. So we need to monitor and control licensing, all aspects of licensing, weights and for the trucks, capacity and so forth, vehicle inspection, and all of those kinds of trainings are required, and that can be monitored and assisted centrally by government and the owners themselves jointly, because there comes a time when you might not find people by putting an ad in the market or go word of mouth to find truck drivers. You'd have to train them yourself and make sure they get the requisite type of training. So we went through that kind of experience. So some aspects from high school to technical college or technical institute to the marketplace, that human resource development needs to be monitored carefully. You know, I've interacted this book here. I don't know if you can see this. This is the federal and the state transportation institute. I was project management or project manager director for those products, all forms of transportation. Anything that deals with transportation was funded federally and at the state level, and we had to follow meticulously all the aspects of project management. So, in terms of how training would fit in, we need to have, as Professor Budhu mentioned, we need to have the master plan. Then we need to break that down, and then we will have a good focus and see where the pockets of needs are for the different skill levels that are required for the projects. We will see the knowledge that's required, the skills, the tools, and the techniques that should be applied for project activities. When it comes to techniques, that's something that management should be focusing on, because there's some legal consequences. If you can't handle a spade, you can injure yourself and injure others, and so on. So I don't have a question there. I would like Professor Budhu to address the skills aspect. We'll assume that the knowledge is out there. They just have to tap into it. The skills, you match the skills with the tools and techniques. So we don't want square pegs in round holes. We have to have a good match between the activities and tasks and the people who are the main drivers there. How do we get the full complement of trained people out in the labor force?
Well, let me point out that I think the question initially that was raised by viewers about training, they do have training in Guyana. The Minister of Labor did indicate that they have a variety of training programs to develop skills, right? He outlined some of those, and I can't remember. I don't know if either you or Dr. Singh can remember he mentioned any training for contractors. But I know he mentioned skills like masonry and carpentry and that kinds of things. But in terms of getting to address your question in particular, I have written about this in the newspaper. And whenever you have this type of development in country, it must go hand in hand with education and training, especially if we don't have the skill sets available. Right? So there is, in my view, a dire need to reform technical and higher education. In fact, I believe the whole colonial-based factory work education system in Guyana needs to be reformed to educate Guyanese for their country's developmental needs, right? And 21st century living, right? If you look at, I don't know what the University of Guyana is now doing, but if you have somebody that is doing chemistry, for example, where would that person find a job now in Guyana? Right? Very limited, right? So you have to look at what your skill sets are needed and then direct your education system to fulfill those needs, right? Now you see that Guyana, as I wrote in newspaper, is in a unique position, not only to reform higher education and technical training, right, but also to be a leader in 21st century education. And the reason it has a very low population, the policy has already been made by the government who wants to transform education, and it has the funding to do so. So all it needs is implementation and boldness to do this. I know we had some chats with the Minister of Education here, and she said to me she doesn't want to be a guinea pig, right? You're only a guinea pig when you're using somebody else's thing, but if you're a leader, right, then you cannot be a guinea pig.
I just like to make a quick comment there. We drew our skills and the persons with multiple skills from the sugar plantations. The sugar estates provided multiple skills. Now, with the closure of sugar estates, the nation suffered in terms of skills development. We have to revisit the old modes of providing skills around the sugar estates, and now where there are gaps, we have to get our technical institutes to fill those gaps. We have to make a deliberate effort to fill the gaps caused by the closure of sugar estates.
Okay, let me just point out to you, the Minister of Labor is onto this program, and they have an aggressive program that is being run by BIT, the Board of Industrial Training, where so far from 2020 August to date, to the end of 2024, they have trained over 12,000 people in various fields: plumbing, electrical, forklift driving, etc. In addition to that, the Ministry of Education has a program, the Dept program. The Dept program that graduate about 4,000 graduates in technical, that include, the Dept include all the various technical institutes, etc. They graduate about 4,000 people per year. So they are moving in that direction. And the Minister of Labor was at the University of Guyana, and he made the same point that Professor Budhu is saying, that they have to change the curriculum to be more responsive to the development trust, the development needs of the country, focusing on technical education. He mentioned about mismatch of qualifications and job requirements, etc. So the government is moving in those directions. And of course, you know about the gas and oil facility, which is set up in Port Morant, plus they're upgrading the old Gaisuku training center there as well. So the government is moving in various, and then they've set up 2 separate training for nurses, etc. This year they graduate over 700 something nursing assistants one time. So the government is ramped up in all those areas, and they realize the critical importance of that. So it's a job in the works, and they are moving forward to introduce AI as well, coding, etc. Okay, Professor Budhu.
Yeah, I think there's a whole slew of things they have to do. And I want to make this point. It's very easy to criticize the government, because especially when we are looking from outside, right? But politics is a very funny animal, right? There's a lot of local context to whatever is being done. And as you mentioned, racism and other things that has to be considered in this. So, but I think in a general way, they have to address some of these concerns that might actually ruin some of the great things they are doing in this country. Right? And some of that, of course, is to train Guyanese. I have advocated, for example, that all their needs, technical manpower needs, can be, actually exists within the Guyanese diaspora. And if they could tap into the Guyanese diaspora properly, right, they can get the training done. They can get a lot of these project management and program management done, right, in a very effective and efficient way, right? Designs too, and even construction, right? But they have to do that. I know of other countries. I was invited to some countries in which they're doing this. China and India are 2 examples, right, where they're making use of their diaspora very well. And I think we can learn a lot of things from how they make use of their diaspora.
Well, the government has been trying, as you know, they had job fair in New York, had a job fair recently in Canada, and they had one in Trinidad to recruit people's skills to go back and work. And there are several businessmen, like I spoke to all of them, they had 130 vacancies, including professional skill, all areas, including unskilled. And he cannot find people to even the unskilled positions. So it's a question of people's attitude towards work. And I'm afraid that the giving out of all these monetary incentives is causing people to try to avoid work, some categories of people to avoid work. That might, to the extent that the president of the private sector commission had to refer to some of them as not being willing to work. I don't want to use the exact word they use. I spoke to another businessman. He needs skilled labor, They will come and work 2 or 3 days, then they disappear. The men will probably go to a neighboring rum shop, drink, and they don't come back till after 3 or 4 days. He said he can't continue like that. So he's faced with the option to import labor. To import labor, you got to prove to the Ministry of Home Affairs that this particular type of is not available. You got to show them advertisement, etc. But he did proceed to a foreign country to give labor, and luckily we have the New Zealanders who are coming in, and anybody can tell you they have filled the gap of many of these things. One friend went, he established a building, 2 million, as an educational and cultural institute. They started a few Guyanese labor, and then they're gone. After they get paid, they disappear. He had to complete that building with Venezuelan labor. All there, and I saw these Venezuelan guys working day and night, and they get that building done and completed. So we got to look not only at the labor, we got to look at people attitudes. We got to transform or change the attitudes towards work and life in general. Domestic violence is so rampant. Look at that guy in the Susan Linden Highway who killed his wife, his family, about 4 or 5 of them, and then he committed suicide. You know, that's a so there are lots of things. Economic development be accompanied by social development, or else there will be trouble. There will be disjunction between these two, and that has to be resolved. One has to go with the other. They're in a symbiotic relationship. Okay, we got to Dr. Gang.
Yes.
The forest.
We had.
I sent you back to Professor Budhu.
Well,
Dr. Ganga.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just like to make this comment here. We need to look at a two-step process by which we supply our manpower to these projects. We can use government projects for people to get experience there. Once they get their experience, then they can shift to the private sector or private management of projects. So that invites the role of the private sector in this problem and these challenges that we are facing. You train in the public sector, and then you graduate over to the more lucrative private sector, which includes oil and gas. So government sector should be looked at as a training ground for the other sectors in the economy. That has been the traditional way that we operated, let's say, the public service, civil service job. You go into teaching, you go into civil service, and then you go into the banks and so forth. That was the path. So we need to identify the pathways and start with high schools and orient the students to the opportunities that are there so that they can then make their choices with full information about opportunities and pay and so forth. So Professor Budhu, I guess he has written about it, and he can reinforce this training, early exposure, and then placement in the labor force.
All right, thank you. Dr. Budhu, you have 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, let me address something you mentioned, Tara. You know, I've mentioned this many times on this program. Transformation, especially infrastructure transformation in Guyana, has to occur also with transcending the people. There's a state of mind developed in Guyana. This is local to any place you go, whether it's Vietnam or any place. There's a local state of mind that is there, and you have to change that state of mind. You know, 50 years ago, this state of mind has been built up. We are still in Guyana, colonial based. We think colonial, right? That has to stop, right? If you're going to live in the 21st century, right? And we're still thinking in that way, right? This colonial mentality is there. And in fact, people who have never served on the colonial mentality still have that mentality because it's in our part, it's becoming our DNA. Right? With regards to the training, right? I think all over the world, what has happened, the business is trying to offload any kind of experience within the business to the government. This has happened throughout the world. They want the business, they want the government to do it. But business must take on the responsibility to collaborate with training institutions and provide facilities and funding to train people for their needs. So it has to be a collaborative effort and not shift these things to government.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Budhu. I believe our time is up. Let me go over to Shamiza, see if she has any questions for you, Professor Budhu. Shamiza?
Thank you, Dr. Tara. Thank you, Professor Budhu. I don't have any questions. I see a lot of comments that is contributing to what you guys are saying. So thank you to everyone who took the time to be here this evening. In conclusion, I would like to ask Professor Budhu for his closing remarks in regards to our topic tonight.
Well, I think Guyana is undergoing massive changes. And the word I use is transformation. I say I don't like to use that word. But it faces many challenges as it moves forward in this rapid economic development. And here are some key obstacles that I see. We talked about the master plan. That needs to be done. This will give people a bird's eye view of what the government is doing, right? And what their objectives are, what their goals are. And that messaging is very important for people to see what their government is going to do with their money, right? For example, if you're getting this disjointed thing, well, we're building a 4-lane highway on the West Coast. We are building one in East Bank. What is the linkage with that? You see, you have to show that. How the airport is connected to the East Bank Road, how it's connected to the West Coast Road, right? Through the bridge. So people get that with all the connectivity. And this will give people the view that they're thought about it. They're going to have efficient movement of people, goods, and services. That's what these roads are about and bridges. Right? Now, even all the development that is taking place in Guyana, IDB, I know, estimated that Guyana would need between $9.4 and $23.8 billion by 2030 for infrastructure works. Could you imagine that? And what we obtained from oil last year, I think it's about 4.47 billion US dollars. So we look at 4 to 10 times what you get from oil. Right? Guyana need to have code standards and a legal framework and enforcement. I've written a lot about this, and the major problems they have with all of these infrastructures because of project management. Right? The contractors are being blamed, and they're rightfully so. But project management, I think, is lacking in Guyana. There's a shortage of technically qualified and experienced staff for development is taking place in Guyana. We have discussed some ways in which they could meet that demand, at least for the short term. And I think the government should make use of the highly qualified and experienced Guyanese diaspora. I think those people can be a consultant or whatever and help them. They need to look at that. Other countries have been doing this. China, India, I mentioned. And we talked about education and training. There's a dire need to reform that, right? And I think in the next go around with this government, I hope they win, right? That they need to reform higher education. Modern technology, especially AI, needs to be there. I know the president has made a lot of statements like this. And if you want to use AI, there are drones, for example, a couple of AI are used to monitor construction projects. I also have written about how the government needs to deploy e-government and e-governance, including e-procurement. The technology for doing this is already there, right? I don't know why it's taken this long to implement. Right? This will actually reduce corruption a lot in government services. I think that in moving forward, in terms of infrastructure, the government needs to look closely at sea defenses and flood protection. I think that because of climate changes, this is going to happen. For example, one of the things I suggested is that they should consider all these subdivisions, they should have ponded or man-made lakes to store all these flood waters and then release it to this oversubscribed drainage system as needed using AI. Right? They need to. I think the government also needs to start thinking about the new capital city, and I think the SQO is great for that, right? And because of climate change, we've all been inundated. You've seen this happen to Bangladesh, and so on. Now, the other thing that I think is very important, I mentioned this many times, and I've seen this in many of the countries that I visited, which are going to rapid development, and this has to do with people. There's going to be a change in people. You will see people get more obese, probably much more lazy. Healthcare costs is going to go up tremendously. So there's a lot of social dimension. There's depression. There's suicide is going to go up. This has happened. Just look at the history. All the countries go through rapid development. This happened. And I think Guyana is in a position to prevent a lot of that from happening. And I know we've discussed, I've mentioned this to the ministers here, and they said they are looking at those things carefully. So I think Guyana is in the right place, and they are moving in the right direction, but there are certain things that they have to consider to make this whole thing work very well so people get value for the money that's spent.
Thank you, Professor Budhu. Tonight, as I leave you guys, I would like you to say a prayer for these women who will be lost as a country, and it is very sad. Tonight, we want to remember Adriana Young, Melina LaCruz, Sue Ann LaCruz, and Waveney LaCruz. Our country has lost women whose lives were snatched away for no good reasons. I would like for you to say a prayer for these women tonight. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, to our entire panel, and to all of our viewers. Thank you so much. Until next time, I am your host, Shamiza Ali, and this is the Guyana Dialogue. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Shamiza. Thank you, Dr. Ganga. We'll meet again next Thursday.